This is code.org and it is performance test time. I want to focus on two things, my app and an example of a written response. These are only examples, right? Make sure we are all create our own content. And what my app is going to focus on is a trivia-like game. So the reason I'm magicking my way to the data tab, I'm going to grab three columns and ask the user to guess some information. So there are many ways to utilize similar logic, as long as it's your own, right? To create an application involving guessing, involving grabbing some random point and asking for user input to confirm. Maybe the year the Congress started, maybe the first name of a Congress member, maybe the state, and then you list all the representatives from that state. And there's a billion different things, right? So the idea of just having some game is not unique. You do need to make an app that is completely yours. So keep that in mind. Now let's talk examples. But code.org also provides a lot of excellent examples. But if you don't know what I'm talking about, it will look something like this, depending on the version of code.org you're at. And you can look at their video scoring guidelines task. They have examples of written responses as well. So I'll go through mine because I like mine and I think it's cool. But keep in mind, tons of resources are already being provided. Now let's take a look at this super duper awesome app first. And by that I mean my Oscar app. I'm going to hit run, but Oscar trivia app. Let me hit start. All right, here's what we got. Got a category, directing, nominee, Reds. Oh, that's the movie. And I have to guess a year, and I don't know. 1897. Oh, wait, 18. Yeah, obviously there was no Oscars in 1897. However, since I use conditionals, since I have a conditional statement down here, I have prepared for that. And it's important that you have a part of your program, a part of your function, or your procedure that operates differently depending on user input. And that's what I just displayed. Now, if I hit random year, what's going to happen? Well, boom, that. It's going to grab a valid random year and output winners from that year. So that is another example of this procedure getting executed and running correctly. Let me hit play again and start. And I don't know, 2005. Submit. The year was 2012. I was wrong again, but you can see the results. All right, that's the quick demo of this. Let's talk about the code. So what I am doing, what this app's goal is, and you could do this with many data sets. My idea, mine, not yours, was to do it with the Oscar winners. But regardless what data set you want to do, I decided to take three columns: year, category, and nominee. And what I do is I output information from two of these columns and ask the user to guess the third. So that sounds complicated. Let's talk about how it actually works. Super broad overview. These first three lines say, hey, grab that information from the lists I imported, from my data set that I imported. What do I grab? Okay, well, get the nominee, it's nom list. Get the category, category list. Get the year, year list, right? So I have these three lists and it stores all of this data. Now, what am I going to do with this? This is literally thousands of lines. What I am going to do is, well, ask the user to start up the game. I'll click start here, and when the user does that, this function runs. I use two functions in my code for readability. Notice there's no parameters here, and that's a problem. By the way, if you have one function and no parameter, right, no argument, nothing used, that's wrong. For this, you need at least one function with a parameter. But I have two, so we're good. Get trivia info. I click start, and the computer says, get trivia info. What is that? Smack. I gotta run this. What's it do? It uses my random number variable. I made that at the top. I just set it equal to 0 because I knew I was gonna use it later. It uses my random number variable, and I say, hey, get a random number from 0 to the size of my year list. So I don't know how big it is. Like I said, it's thousands of lines long, thousands of rows long. I just say, hey, get the entire year list, get the length of that, and get a random number. Why do this? Why use that number? Because I'm going to then use that for what the player is going to guess. So I grab this random number, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 100, I don't know. And then I say, all right, change it to the game screen, this screen. And I say, all right, the text, set category text area, category text, category list random number. So if the random number is 5, then whatever's in the category list at 5 is displayed here. Then nominee, whatever's in the category list at 5, indexed at, nominee is indexed at 5, displays here, right? So they would be matching because this is going to be 5, that's going to be 5. Those items in the list are displayed. Now the third item, year input, notice I just blank it. This is the default text. I set that up in design mode. This is just default, type your guess. So I blank that out, and then finally, I use this variable. I also declared this guy at the top, trivia year. Trivia year just stores, well, the actual year that this nominee and this category are related to. So I want to just point out the data, because this all gets confusing quick. Let's say my random number was 2. Keep in mind with indexes, and that's what I'm using, indexes start at 0. So you might say, wait a minute, Jack Nicholson is index 1. It's not, because in my nominee list, index 0 is Jack Nicholson. Actor 0, in my category list, actor is at index 0, and this is at index 0 of the year list. So just remember, and then this would be index 1, index 2, index 3 is Lee Grant. I know it says 4. I just want to point that out. So let's say my random number, like I said, was 2. Well, 0, 1, 2. So Louise Fletcher for the nominee, and that would slap in there. It would then grab the category, actress, slap that there, and it would grab this year, 1975. We wouldn't see it yet, but it would assign it to my trivia year variable. By the way, here's those variables. Trivia year, nothing. Random number, I just set to 0. This list I'll use later. So we got all that assigned, and this screen pops up. Now the user actually has to enter something. Let me go with my original example, a year that doesn't even work. Submit. So once I click submit, what in the world just happened? Well, once I click submit guess. If trivia year, and what did we just say trivia year was? Oh yeah, that's where I stored the correct answer, right? What that year actually is supposed to be. Okay, so if that year is equal to get year input, get text year input. Huh? Well, let me hover over here. You'll notice the ID of this where I typed, is ID year input. So I can use this, get text, and then the ID right here, and the computer knows, oh, all right, I got to go figure out squaw, and grabs whatever I had typed in here. It then compares it. Okay, is trivia year 2 equals means, hey, look and compare. 1 equals is creating a variable, but 2 says, hey, compare these two. And I'm asking the computer a question. If trivia year is equal to whatever year they put here, well, then the text will be correct, and it will keep going. Otherwise, if I'm wrong, which I was, I put 1792, then this line would never run, but this line, the else, must. So one or the other. If it's right, then this runs, and it keeps going. This would not. If it's wrong, which I was, this runs. And what happened? Well, yeah, wrong. The year was, what was the trivia year? It showed me, right? So it gave me the answer when I entered the wrong year. The year was 1981, and that's what that would be equal to. Changes me to the results screen. Now this is the meat and potatoes, the important stuff of my program. This is the procedure that I'm meeting many of the requirements with. Line 28, get all winners that year. This is a function, and I pass it a parameter. I pass it an argument. What's my argument? Get text input, year input. So once again, like I did here, I'm grabbing the input that the user had, whatever I put, right? So right now, that year input would be 1972. When I hit submit, that's 1972. And the computer says, okay, get all winners that year. What is that? It starts hunting for it. Smack. Oh, what was input year? Like I said, it grabbed that year I entered on the screen. 1972. First thing I do is I take that winners that year list that I had created way up here just for saving it up there to a variable, and I blank it out just to make sure there's nothing left over. Then what? Well, I smack onto, I add to that list the word year, and that's just because I want to keep track. So I want the user, maybe I forgot what year I entered. Well, it's going to show them right here anyways. I'm like, no, I got this right. Oh, not so much. So that's why I do that. So the first item in this list, those winners, is always the year they entered. Now, what happens next is a for loop. My loop, I start at 0, pretty common there. Now, I++ just means, hey, count up 1 each time, right? I equals I plus 1. Now, what's the limit? What's going to stop my loop from going? I must always be less than the length of my list, right? And that's perfect, because then I know I'll get all the way to the end of the list if I is going to be less than the length. This is also a huge benefit for indexes starting at 0, right? Because if the first item in this list was indexed at 1, if Jack Nicholson was indexed at 1, then I would have to end my loop at yearList.length plus 1. Because I would have to go all the way through all those values. But since I start counting at 0, I could ask the list to stop counting when I gets to be equal to or the length of this list. All right, how's it working? So I is 0 first time through, smack. If year list 0, so whatever the year is at that index, it's 1975. If that is equal to my input year, I input 1792. So these definitely aren't equal. But if there were, I would add that nominee to my now emptied list. So I would start populating this list. Now, this time around, nothing is going to match that, right? There's no Oscar winners in 1792. We shockingly didn't have TVs. So it's going to actually go through the entire list without finding a match. And that's fine. This is the conditional. This is the thing I'm making sure that runs in that case. This also meets some of the requirements, right? I need to have something that runs only in certain situations and not in other as part of my procedure in my program. So what I mean though, after all that runs, I check, hey, is winners that year dot length less than 2? Why 2? I know it has 1 item in it. I appended this, winners that year, right? So I know it has 1. So if it's less than 2, right? If it's just 1 item, then they entered some weird thing. And what do? Okay, so if this is true, if it's less than 2, wow, they entered 1972, they entered Buzz Lightyear, I don't know. But what I want to be added then is no Oscar winners this year, to kind of show them what's going on. Now, if it is greater than 2, then I know they found some results. So random year, this will find some results. What gets appended then, that's all, folks. So if we found information, I just threw this on the end, and then we output it to the screen. So, the random year, by the way, let's take a look at what I just did there. Random year, I click, I use my random number variable, I say random number to the end of the list, get winner that year, and I run this exact same function, get all winners that year. This is another function call I'm calling to my procedure. This time my argument that I am passing, right, that I am using to pass as a parameter, right, this argument, year list random number, is some random year that I just grab, and then I use that year. I have no idea. So maybe my random number is 14, since index started at 0. If my random number was 14, the year at index 14 is 1975, and that year would be passed here. I'll output all the nominees of that year. And that works its way through my program. I also want to just demonstrate play again. If I do enter a valid year and am wrong anyway, submit, then it will actually still find the data. All right, that's the super fast run through of my application. Let's look at my written response. And again, highly suggest you taking a look at what code.org already provides, but here is mine. So, overall purpose of the program, the Oscar app, was all you need to do, one sentence. Don't bore the people. You should be able to summarize what your program is in one sentence. Inform players about past Oscar winners, right, and entertain them. All right, now what else? Describe the functionality that the video illustrates. If you're confused about making a video, I also have a video on that. Make sure to check that out. Regardless, what you want to show is the video shows user interaction, right? You need to show them going through your application. Make sure they reach every screen in that video, and also make sure that they see the results of your if statement. So for this application, I want to make sure I enter some bad data so I can show that if they enter that bad data, how my application changes here in this function. You want to have a way that your app differs because of user interaction, and mine is from a bad year. Okay, so once you have that, describe the input. Input, guys. Input's buttons, it's text, it's drop downs, it's radio buttons, anything the user is doing, interacting, that is giving you information that the app's responding to, that's going to be input. So I said there are several types of input shown in my video. User navigates through the apps, and this is what your video should be showing, right? You want to show the navigation through the apps, enters a year in the input box, touches the button, all of that's going to be input. All right. 2 code segments you develop during the task. The first program code segment must show how the data has been stored in a list. So your data should be in a list, and it's likely, I hope, towards the top of your program. Right, my nominee list, my category list, my year list that I'm using for this data set. So that's how I store the data, and how do I use all that data? Largely within here, right? This is where I loop through it. I use an if statement and all of that. So here's one of them. I just said year list because I felt like I was using that the most. Down here, the second program code segment must show the data in the same list processed. So just because you make a list doesn't mean you're using it. You got to prove to them that you are. How did I make this look all fancy? Well, once again, I would recommend code.org. They actually have a page on this. So a Chromebook, if you press Shift Control plus show Windows keys at the same time, you'll get a crosshair where you can take a screenshot. Mac, it's Control Command 4. Windows, it's Windows key Shift S. And you can take a screenshot like this. And with that screenshot, I can go over here. I already have my code here, but with that screenshot, I could paste, right? I just right click and I paste. So that's how you can use text, take a screenshot and paste. All right, here's my code. This is my procedure. Notice that I have a parameter. You need to have a way that a parameter, you need your function to have a parameter. So I'm using year. They're passing year to it, as we saw. Identify the name of the list being processed in your response. All right, line 3 I defined, right? I created a variable year list, assigned it all the information stored in the year column. Each year or number is stored as text, a string. So you're just telling them what that is. If any of these are super long, any of your answers, you're probably overdoing it, right? Being concise shows that you have a mastery of the concept. Identify what data contained in the list is represented in your program. So, hey, what's in there? The year list. The year list, I'm saying what it does. So whatever data you are using, whatever list you chose, tell them what it does. An item in the list is chosen at random. The user will enter a guess, and their input is checked against the value originally chosen from that list. So how is the list used? It's used to check their answer. The list is also used to output other winners to the result page. So how is the person going to see that list and interact with it? That's all you're doing there. Explain how the selected list manages complexity. You should be familiar with these words. Don't forget over them. In your program. By explaining your program code could not be written, or how it would be differently written if a list was not used. So this should be somewhat obvious, especially if you're using a for loop, which you should be, and a list. If you're using a for loop, the only way that is working is you're using a list that you iterate through, right? You're counting through it with something like I. So if I didn't have this, I think the Oscar list is like 1,000 rows of winners. So if I didn't have a list, I would have to have literally 1,000 variables for award 1 equals blah, blah, blah. Award 2, 1,000 of them. I would then have to attempt to somehow search through those 1,000 variables because I couldn't just loop through. I couldn't count through them. So think about how complex that would be to look at the data, to check the data, to filter the data. Here's what I was thinking. My program actually utilizes 3 lists for nominees, years, and categories. All work together to manage complexity. My data set is well over 1,000 rows long. It would be nearly impossible to individually create variables. You do want to think about how you would do it without a list. Why would that cause a problem? each item in the list. Even if I was able to do so, then creating procedures and logic that could choose a variable at random and check against user input would grow increasingly complex. Also, the year list is used to output other winners from the same year to the result screen. This requires no additional variable, right? So to loop through that entire list, I don't need another variable. We have a list to be used. Without the list, each data point on the list, nominee, year, and category would need an individual variable. Comparing, filtering, outputting information would be overwhelming. The year list and other lists I use allow for complex actions to take place while writing a clear, logical, and concise program. Yes, lists allow for clean-looking code that is readable. I can't read 1,000 variables. It would be boggling to my mind. All right. Capture and paste 2 program code segments. I want to hit upon this first. Notice this guy right here. Right? It's going to be the same. Yours could be different, but it might not be. Where I process my list is the same code. I guess it's a different image, but it's the same code that I'm going to use for this part of it. And that's fine. The first program's code segment, student develop procedure. So think function, and here's mine. Define the procedure, name, and return type. I don't have a return type, right? So procedure's name, my name is get all winners. Contain and use one or more parameters. Input year was my parameter. Function of the procedure, yep, and I use input year to filter and look for information. Implement an algorithm that includes sequencing, selection, and iteration. So sequencing, yep, does it run in a sequential procedural order? It does. Selection, do I loop through information through a sequence? Do I mix and select certain aspects of that list? I do with this, and append it to another list. So are you using the list? Are you looping through it? Are you doing something with the data? That's in rough terms what they mean, and I am. Now, the second program code segment must show where the student developed procedure is being called. Where do you write this function's name in your program? Whatever your function is, look for where you wrote it other than in this declaration, because that's where you're using it. So I had 2 examples where I called mine. I used this one, right? Then provide a written response that does both of the following. Describe in general what the selected procedure does and how it contributes to the overall functionality. This procedure filters a long list for data that matches a specific year. The data is then output to the screen with set text. Yep, that's what it does. Very straightforward, 1 or 2 sentences. What's it doing? Filters the list, outputs data. And this one, I would point out, is not as focused on outputting or updating the winner area. This is only focused on outputting that final information that they encounter here. That's what this is, not this. And that's why I'm highlighting that in my answer. Explain in detail steps how algorithm implemented in the selected procedure accomplishes this task. So they need to be able to recreate it just by me explaining it. I would highly recommend you use line numbers. The procedure function has parameter, input year. Make sure your procedure has some parameter it uses. Using that, it is passed an argument, and that just means this information that goes in for the input year. So in my example, my argument is going to be, boom, whatever year I put here. If I hit submit, 1987 is my argument. How do I know that? Well, when I hit submit, on submit, right? Click. I'm going to run get all winners. And what do I use for the argument? For the argument, get the text of your input. And that's what that is. So when I run get all winners, it's grabbing this for your input. Okay? So using past an argument list contains a specific year to be used to filter the nominee list. Yep. On line 41, the result list variable is defined as empty. Yep, I clear out the list. And you can see right here, I'm just clearing it out. Line 42 appends to the list the year passed as an argument to the list. So line 42 adds that first line about the year. An if statement, conditional statement, is used on line 44 to check the value of the current index if the year is equal to the one it's searching for. If so, the nominee list, nom list, is used to append the nominee string to the index at that index in the non-list to the result list. After the for loop finishes, if statement checks if no results were found. Yeah, that's at the end, right? So I loop through the whole thing. I'm checking for those years. If I don't find any matches, if I never find any year that matches this, then my winners that year list will only have one data point. And the only thing it will have is what I append here, the word year and input year. It won't have any actual nominees because this was never true. It never found a year that matched that. So it never took the nominee list at that index and smacked it in and appended to my winner list. So that's what I'm explaining here. If it's less than that, and I'm trying to explain the distinction, the difference, what happens, and how the program responds. All right. So now, when do I call it? The player adds their guess to the game, clicks submit. The guess input is used to filter the list for that year. And I could have put the year right here that I use later. For example, 1972, right? Or 1792. They're asking for specific examples. Now, second call, the player clicks the random year button, and I'm explaining how that occurs. And the year list is chosen that the year filtered the nominees. It then outputs the results. Now, you need to detail the distinction here. And these two calls must produce different results. Different code must run in your program from these two calls. And mine achieves that, right? Because if I use 1792, that will be no Oscars for this year. That line of code will run because of this if statement. This line will not. However, if I use a valid year, vice versa. So, the first call to the function passes, and this would be the invalid year. The player's guessed year input as an argument to the function. For example, the user might guess 1792 as the year. The year is passed to the function. In the function, a result list is defined as empty, and the year is appended to the first item. Then, in the loop starting on line 43, and again, you want to be explicit, starting on line 43, an if statement, and then in the loop starting on line, looks like I moved, if statement to check the current year of the list matches the year that is being searched for. Since no Oscars were held in 1792, this input would not match any in the list. For the loop in the year list, the for loop is iterating through. Therefore, the result list would be empty other than the initial year value. An if statement is used to append a message explaining this to the user, right? That the list is empty, there were no Oscars that year. Now, here's the difference, right? What if the year is valid? And this is when a different part of the code runs, which you need. The second call differs from the first because the year searched for, the one passed as an argument, is randomly chosen, right? But I don't necessarily even need to use that call. I could use one that the user picks and just make it a valid year. Is randomly chosen, blah, 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 from these lines. However, it could also be a call from the user entering a valid year. Because the function's the same as long as the year is valid. And now I'm going to explain. Therefore, the year will have a matching data when and the year list is iterated over, right? The year will appear, whether it's the random number being generated that I use or the user enters a valid number. Regardless, we know that will have matching data. And I want to explain the difference. Random number, and I went through this with you, index, the year list has a value, so somehow the year is 1976. That year is then passed to the function. The function would transverse the year list, it would loop through it. However, some indexes would match the value. When that happens, the nominee at the index in the non-list is appended, right? So when the year matches, we go to the nominee list, we grab that same index and slap it into my resulting list. The loop continues to run, checking if other indexes match the year, appending the nominees if the condition is met. After the loop ends, as a result, after the loop, the length of the result list is checked. Since it is greater than 1, that the else statement would append, that's all folks, right? Because it's successful. And notice, again, different parts of the code running as a result of the function call. That's all folks list, the screen would update with that. Last part of this, guys, is you just need to put what the actual returned result is. I can copy and paste. I copied and pasted mine, right? Because you can. When you run your app, if it's text, you can just copy and paste your result. So that was a super quick overview of my example. Good luck. Make something awesome.